Good morning, everybody.
Hello, Cami. How are you?
Can't hear you. Your mute is on.
Here I am.
There you are. How's everything in Alberta today?
Good. Well, it's snowy.
Here too, in Manitoba. I'm going to be in Calgary April 1st to the 3rd, so I'm not sure if you're around.
Let me look.
I haven't booked my flights yet, so I can come in earlier or stay later. Let's
Good.
connect. Okay.
The second is a little bit busy, but the first and the third are good.
Okay.
Well, it is 1 o'clock, Myrna. I'm sure there'll
Okay.
be some other that are going to be joining us. But again, just out of the interest for those who are here, thank you for joining us. But we might as well get started.
Great, excellent, thank you. So we did have over 30 people register for today, so that was very exciting. And I'm Myrna Grawn. I am the the executive director of CAAR, Canadian Association of Agri-Retailers, and we're thrilled to have you all join us. So what we'd like to do today is have Paul will speak to us and Lisa will do an introduction shortly. And then the format is to have an engaged conversation with questions after. So again, be thinking of your questions. Paul, when you start off, if you want to engage questions as you go, that's great. Otherwise, we can have a facilitated conversation after. I did want to introduce our team, and I think not everyone's on the call today, but we do have Micah joining us today. I don't know, Micah, if you want to give a little wave. She does our member relations as well as our communications. So she is the manager of those two key areas. Grace Wedlake is our controller, our accountant. Lisa Siragusa, who you were just listening to, she's our training and project manager. So for all training needs and these Connect sessions that we've started to celebrate our 30th anniversary, that's all what Lisa's been coordinating. Tracy Shelton, who is unfortunately not able to join us, she is our convention manager. So once we start getting closer to convention, you'll be hearing a lot from Tracy and Jordan Sisawa, who's joining us. And if you want to give a wave there, Jordan, he's our social media marketing coordinator. So Jordan is the person who you may reach out to or see LinkedIn and X. So some of our upcoming events, we obviously are celebrating our 30th anniversary this year in 2025. Our convention is going to be November 18th to the 20th in Saskatoon, covering a lot of unique things, sort of a little bit of honoring the past, but more looking and navigating the future. AI tools, a lot of different topics that we're looking at under technology and leadership. So our Care Connect sessions, the next one following today's is going to be April 3rd, and it's going to be mitigating the risks of maximum residue limits. And so Greg Bartley from Pulse Canada is going to be joining us on April 3rd. And we do have our Canadian Ag Retail Forum. This is for members only. We do these twice a year, one at convention and one virtual. This time particularly, we are going to be talking on March 25th, 12 noon. Well, every province is going to be a bit different, but it's going to be about our strategic plan. And so what are some of the key things that are important to you as ag retailer and supplier members that our board needs to hear? So that's what that's going to be about, be a 1-hour session. That's what we have coming up. And I think, Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you. So the format of these sessions is Paul will come, our speaker today is going to come, give us a presentation for about a half hour, 20 minutes. And then thereafter, as Myrna had indicated, that we want this to be an engaged conversation. So any questions that you have of Paul, now's the time to ask. But before we do get Paul to take over, I just want to introduce him a little bit more and speak about him a little bit more. So he serves as the Director of Regulatory Affairs Chemistry at CropLife. And in his capacity, Paul is instrumental in helping lead one of the two principal business lines at CropLife Canada, providing strategic leadership in addressing regulatory and policy priorities within the Canadian plant science sector. CropLife Canada is a trade association representing developers, manufacturers, and distributors of innovative plant science solutions for agriculture, urban, and public health applications. Before joining CropLife in 2022, Paul dedicated over 14 years to the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, a division of Health Canada. During his tenure, he honed his expertise as a policy analyst, focusing on policy development with a particular emphasis on WTO, Codex, and maximum residue levels. Paul holds a bachelor's degree in economics and political science from the University of Ottawa. Passionate about collaboration, Paul is committed to working towards enhancing the agricultural system for everyone involved. So that being said, Paul, I will stop sharing now and I will turn it over you to lead this conversation.
Okay, thanks a lot, Lisa. Wow, I hope I can live up to that. Okay, so let me just share my slide here. There we go. Can everyone see that?
All good.
Okay, great. So thank you very much, Myrna, Elisa, Jordan, and the CAAR team for inviting me to speak to you today. Good afternoon, maybe good morning, depending on where you are from coast to coast. Very happy to be here for the opportunity to speak with you about something that is near and dear to our hearts here at CropLife Canada, and that's really the bright future of Canadian agriculture. Now, I'd say we all have very different roles to play in that success, and different areas of expertise to move the sector forward. But the secret sauce to supercharging Canadian ag is really in bringing all of that know-how and expertise together so that it rows in the same direction on issues that we all have a vested interest in. Now, having said that, I guess it is true that it sounds a lot easier than it actually is. So my hope today is that our conversation can represent a little contribution to all the other contributions that are happening every day that result in a step forward. So there's pros and cons to presenting online, but engagement is the tricky part. So I'll be very honest that I'm trying something a little bit different today. It'll be part storytelling, part call to action, and I hope that I can leave you with at least a couple of interesting bits of information that might come in handy as you go about your day to day. So in a world, of snippets and sound bites, we tend to lose sight of the greater context sometimes, and a true understanding of what I call, what we call the why. And that's really what I'm interested in, is that if we can understand why, then perhaps we can adapt our advocacy efforts more effectively. So, as someone who has been close to the why, I would say, at issue in today's presentation, I'd like to share a little sliver of that perspective to give you some food for thought, and then tie it into industry's perspective and why it's so important for agriculture to unite. So, Lisa gave a great overview of my CV. So just to reiterate a little tiny bit about me, I'm the Director of Regulatory Affairs here on the chemistry team at CropLife Canada, which is basically just a long title for pesticide-related stuff. I spent a little over 20 years in the public service in various capacities that included a 2-year hiatus to be a policy advisor to a federal cabinet minister under Prime Minister Harper, and then 14 years at PMRA before joining CropLife. And so my main area of interest was trade policy, still is trade policy, trade negotiations. Worked a lot on the trade-related aspects of maximum residue limits, navigating the intricacies of Codex and the WTO. So that's, that's where my I guess you could call it expertise lies. And just one little tidbit about me, a little my little claim to fame is that I swam against Michael Phelps once, and he left me gasping for air in his wake. So thought I'd throw in that kind of little icebreaker there. So okay, so let's get to it. Let me go to the next slide here. Okay. So as you probably know, CropLife Canada represents the developers, manufacturers, and distributors of pest control and modern plant breeding products in Canada. And if and when you hear the term registrant, these are the companies that look to register crop protection innovations for use in agriculture, and they're responsible for the vast majority of Canada's innovation pipeline. And it's vital that we protect that pipeline in this new and uncertain world. So I'm not sure about you, but I'm a visual person, and growing up, maybe like other kids, my reading of choice were comic books and cartoons. And back then, it's because they were fun. But then, as you get older, you realize how wild it is that a single image can say so much, right? And so a picture really can truly be worth 1,000 words. So I'd like for us to think about it today during the time that we have together. And we know that change is inevitable, right? Things happen, but they don't happen magically. And sometimes not doing anything is doing something. And sometimes that could work. But we don't think that's the case today. And one's perspective of that change really depends on what it is. So because I worked at PMRA for a while, I'll try a little bit of a juggling act. I can't juggle for real, but I'll try to don my old regulatory hat first, and then switch over to my industry hat. Like I'm sure we've all been in situations where, speaking with people, friends, family on a particular topic, where we think to ourselves, "Oh, you don't know the half of it," or like it's way more complicated than you think. That sort of thing. There's so much information out there, so much noise that it can be hard sometimes to think clearly about what is truly needed as the world changes. So, and it seems to be faster than ever before. So really my hope with this presentation is that I can shed a little bit of light on why pesticides are regulated the way they are. You would think it's simple, but it's not always the case. So that I can provide a little bit of context to PMRA's decision making, because we tend to forget or not appreciate that why with everything moving so fast, and then describe things as we see them from an industry perspective. Excuse me. So while PMRA is really small, its impact, I would say, is pretty mighty, not just on our member companies, but on all of agriculture, which is why getting policies and regulations right is so crucial. And to get it right, the agricultural value chain really must be heard loud and clear. I don't think anyone here would bat an eyelash if I say, that agriculture more broadly is one of the most diverse sectors of the economy. Got many stakeholders that have very distinct concerns. You've got retailers, equipment manufacturers, you've got, growers of field crops, you've got greenhouses, you've got beekeepers. I mean, the list goes on. And it really is an economy within an economy. And that diversity is really a beautiful thing, but it can also lead to challenges in a world that wants, simple answers to complex issues. And it's kind of ironic, actually, that's exactly what I'm going to try to do today. But ultimately, one of our goals is to find the ties that bind us and amplify those messages to government and elected officials and the public, because we know that fewer and fewer people truly understand what it takes to get from farm to plate. So the roadmap for today, you'll see a couple of emojis. I use them because, you know, they're fun. So first, I'd like to start by setting the stage for you, and maybe, you know, maybe something that you weren't expecting, and that's a short history lesson. And if it's something you didn't know, then I'll take that as a win. And then there's so many different ways that this, you know, presentation like this can go, but it's really impossible to cover everything in a single session. So I've opted to share some insight into how PMRA is structured and how decisions are made at a high level. And then rounding those out, my hope is that it could provide some context from the regulatory side of things. And then we'll touch on the current situation at a high level. And then finally, where we feel we could be going, but where we really need to go. And I mean, I'm a policy guy, so when I get going, I tend to get into the weeds. So I'll do my best to deliver this presentation more like that story and less of a dissertation. So I'll start with, once upon a time there was snake oil. And we all know what snake oil is. You know, it's something that really exploded during the industrial revolutions in the 18th, 19th, and early 20th centuries. So imagine yourself, you know, you're walking to work one day and you see an ad for a traveling medicine show, and it sounds really interesting. So, you know, you go there, and there's a slick salesman who tells you that he's got this miracle cure for all your aches and pains, and you've never seen it before. But, you know, your brain is wired to be intrigued because, hey, like, if this is, you know, this is good for your health. So, of course, you're going to buy some. Then when you get home, you're excited to try it. So, you know, you lather it on and then you wait. And you're not really sure if it works. Not really sure if it does anything. But, you know, you figure it takes time. So, you know, maybe you'll go out and you'll buy more. And eventually you will ask that question. Does it really work? And then now imagine that everyone else is buying this stuff too. And that noise of people asking that very same question of does it work is getting louder and louder, right? And it's too loud to ignore. So that question of does it work in the most basic sense is what we call efficacy today. And this is important for a little bit later. So government at the time really had no choice but to respond. And in the early 20th century, the U.S. government actually started to look into Stanley's snake oil liniment and found that there was no snake oil and that it was mostly just various mineral oils. And it gave the real snake oil that actually contained a lot of omega-3 that is supposed to do all that wonderful stuff for reducing inflammation a bad name, and became synonymous, as we know, with fraud. And when presented with a problem, governments act. And it's as simple as that. And the way that a government acts is generally by legislating. So the solution was to bring down the regulatory hammer first and prohibit. Prohibit until an assessment was done to determine whether or not a product works before approving it for use and sale. So it's around that time that we began to see the first federal regulations in North America aimed at controlling the spread of these types of products. So, okay, you may be thinking, okay, that's great, Paul, you know, thanks very much, but what does that have to do with pesticides today in Canada? And I will go as far as saying that the answer to that is everything. So the problem is that it wasn't just limited to health products and drugs. It was pesticides as well. But the difference is that notwithstanding, you know, let's call it the fraudulent nature of snake oil marketing, the underlying premise was that these products are there to help alleviate aches and pains and cure diseases. Now you contrast that with farmers who have been battling Mother Nature since the dawn of, you know, modern agriculture many millennia ago. How are they supposed to get rid of diseases? How are they supposed to get rid of, you know, fungi, weeds, you know, insects? What are they supposed to do? So I did a little research, and the internet told me that the first recorded use of an insecticide was about 4,500 years ago, where people or growers would use sulfur, different sulfur compounds. And then a little bit later, in about 3,200 years ago, arsenic and mercury were used to control body lice. And since then, that intervening period, thousands of years, farmers have been engaged in that eternal struggle, using whatever they can, whatever works, to suppress, control, or outright destroy these pests that damage their crops, herds, livelihoods. So it's no surprise that the only compounds that do that effectively are those that result in the desired effect. And this photo here is a can of paint known as Paris green, which was used by many famous painters, including Van Gogh. But it might interest some that the amount of arsenic that it contained had a fantastic side effect, in that it could vaporize Colorado potato beetle. And it was so good that towards the second half of the 19th century, it became known as the first chemical insecticide used commercially at scale. But it wasn't without its faults, and the concerns with its use are well documented. And eventually, Canada joined the regulatory party. And in 1927, the government brought into force the act to regulate the sale and inspection of agricultural economic poisons. And as far as I can tell, this was Canada's first pesticide legislation. And its purpose was to ensure that products worked. In other words, that they weren't agricultural snake oil. And I'll draw your attention, as I'm sure it's already been drawn, to the word poison on the can, because that sets the tone, really, for where we are today, for how pesticides have been regulated and where we are today. So recall, the previous slides, right? Due to the nature of these types of products, step one applies, and that is prohibition first. So it's not like a court of law where you're, considered innocent until proven guilty. You're considered guilty until you're proven innocent. So after that, the historical record is a little scant, and library and archives might have a little bit more for those who are really adventurous. But there would have been a recognition that pesticides are not just used in agriculture. And the first Pest Control Products Act was enacted in 1939. Now, many statutes and regulations are not new. You just think about the tax code, for example. Why reinvent the wheel when you already have one, right? So they're always amended and modernized almost over time, and it's almost always to add more, not remove. So the Act of 1927 morphed into the PCPA, which then evolved again over time when the concept of safety became more important after World War II. So, in part, when we started understanding more about the damage that chemical agents used in warfare could inflict on humans and the environment. So, in 1968, the PCPA was amended accordingly to shift that focus from efficacy to safety. And while there were other amendments over the years, they really culminated in the PCPA that we have today, that received royal assent in 2002 and came into and was brought into force 4 years later in 2006. So all of that to say that the PCPA is and always has been an act based on prohibition, notwithstanding all of the incredible advances in modern science and technology over the years. So it's ingrained in the fabric of the regulator, and it's the lens through which it conducts its very important work. So this is really about protecting human health and the environment, and being as reasonably certain as possible that no harm will occur to Canadians or their environment today and in the future. So it's a huge responsibility that we respect. It's something that we need, but sometimes, I don't want to say the pendulum can sometimes swing a little bit further than one might expect. So having said all that, this is a basic representation of how PMRA works. It's changed a bit since the transformation initiative was launched in 2021, but the core functions haven't. And my apologies in advance because this slide is going to start to get a little bit busy. The focus really today is on PMRA, but I thought I'd throw in, a few others that both from within government that both enable and influence decision making in different ways. I won't spend much time on these, but just so you get the picture, you've got the regulatory operations and enforcement branch that does things like, field inspections, investigations. You have the Canadian Food Inspection Agency that monitors and that monitors and enforces maximum residue limits. You've got a little spoken of branch or unit in Health Canada, LSU, called Legal Services Unit. They take on more importance these days because they provide the legal advice for what is unfortunately becoming a much greater caseload against PMRA and its decisions. And then you also have central agencies like Treasury Board Secretariat, Finance, Justice. And I included Health Canada's headquarters in there because, of course, PMRA's work is overseen at the bureaucratic level by the Deputy Minister of Health. In terms of other government departments that are active in this space to varying degrees, of course, we've got Agriculture Canada, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans as it relates to the use of pesticides in aquaculture. There are others, but it's just to illustrate that PMRA doesn't operate in a vacuum. And frankly, I usually try to stick to less on a slide, and I couldn't really make the font any smaller. Excuse me. So this is where the story will start to evolve a bit, and where I'll gradually switch over to my industry hat, where I'll try to describe things as they are from our perspective, how they ought to be, and why it's so important for agriculture to be united. So this purple squiggly line here is what we would consider core PMRA, and that's those functions that until 2021 generally drove overall regulatory decision making. So let's call it, pre-2021, and the senior DG or Director General of Regulatory Science and Operations was the head of PMRA, and at the time that was the executive director. So when companies are ready to submit a data package, so I'm talking about not on the post-market side, but on the pre-market side. When they're ready to submit a data package, whether it's a new active ingredient, adding a new use, amending a label, changing a formulation, the list goes on. It goes into the registration directorate, which then sets off a series of events across the agency or branch, because PMRA is a branch of Health Canada, depending on what the submission is for. But in a nutshell, at some point in time, virtually all of PMRA is engaged for every submission, reevaluation, or special review. Now, the next squiggly line here, this red one, there we go. This red squiggly line represents what was added after 2021. And this is extremely significant because it really formalized a new layer of considerations in PMRA's decision making, a layer that we hadn't seen before. So if you recall at the beginning, I said that one's view of change depends on where you sit. Well, from where industry sits, this additional structure was an unexpected and concerning shift. Whereas maybe some other groups might have thought that this was something like this was sorely needed. But regardless of how we feel, it was unprecedented in Canada that routine regulatory science for pesticides was publicly politicized and turned into an election issue. At least as long as I've been involved in this space. So in essence, it really changed everything. And while at first we attempted to give it a fair shake and work within this new framework, using it as an opportunity to make improvements, it's really become clear to industry that change through meaningful engagement was not really the goal. And I'll touch on this a little bit later. So after the mess of the previous slides, really promised to keep it more streamlined. Okay, so while all the work that needs to be done to go from lab to label is very complex, the evaluation process itself is pretty straightforward if you strip away, all of the nitty-gritty. So that's kind of what I'm going to do. And I'm going to use that, that legal analogy like I did earlier, and that's, imagine yourself in a system where you are guilty until proven innocent. And to prove that innocence, there's some serious hurdles that you need to overcome. And first, there's the evaluation. And I like analogies because for me anyway, I find that they stick a little bit better. I hope this analogy resonates with some of you. But if anyone has watched The Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Rings, imagine you're on this quest, and you arrive at the giant doors of Durin, and you got to go, and to get to the other side. Really, the only realistic way to do that is you have to go through the mountain, right? So you got to go through, Moria. If that's not familiar to you, maybe Indiana Jones, Temple of Doom, or I guess any other movie where there's some kind of riddle that needs to be solved with no other way out. Maybe that might jog something. But to open those doors, it's like an initial screening before the trials and tribulations really begin. So you need to know the password to get inside. So you've done all your research, you've poured over all the manuscripts, all the guides, from previous travelers. You've spent many expensive years preparing to ensure you're not going to be turned back at that gate. And then once those doors open, inside, you realize you're not alone, right? There's lots of very smart people who are looking at you very suspiciously. Some might call them regulators, some might call them evaluators, and they are definitely not to be trifled with. And apart from some very limited exceptions, they won't simply just wave you through. Right? They want to see your offering. They want to determine for themselves whether it's worthy of proceeding further into those depths. So, they go off, they do that. They disappear into their workshops while, some sentries guard the path, and they could be a while. So you do need to be ready for it. And during that time, that offering is being dissected, right? It's being dissected by various specialists. They're looking to understand it. They also want to see where it falls short, maybe. And they might occasionally emerge to ask you some questions. Some might be benign and some might be more severe. And they also have these internal committees that are there to discuss your offering as a group, sort of across the various specialties. And only once those deliberations are complete will they let you know whether you've succeeded in convincing them. And if you have, they will then let the many other denizens of Moria have their say, because they're very thorough. So if these final consultations don't change the regulator's conclusions, then success, you might finally pass. And I'll just end this slide by saying that, if those of you who've seen The Lord of the Rings, you might flag that that's not all, and you would be right. And the movie and the book ends with a pretty epic scene that I won't describe, and I just hope that you can connect the dots. So this brings me to our call to action, and the part of my presentation where my old regulator hat is off. In a few short years, we've seen the world change dramatically. Countries are now, countries where countries could rely on generally stable and predictable trade relationships. It's more of a dog-eat-dog world. And some people are saying that things will never be the same again. I think time will tell, but we may very well have entered into a new era, and we need to be ready. And I would say that while the jury is still out on whether or not that is going to be the case, there will continue to be lots of noise, lots of uncertainty economically, geopolitically, in many areas where we have varying levels of influence and control. But what's clear is that right now Canada is facing some unprecedented challenges, and every industry is grappling with how to navigate these new uncharted waters, and government is as well. So our challenge is to find stability and predictability closer to home. And for us, from where I sit, our wheelhouse is the regulatory and scientific environment. And we have seen a steady erosion of that predictability, which ultimately results in less innovation and access to it. And as an organization that spends a lot of time in the regulatory space, we strongly believe that now is not the time to pursue regulatory changes that were born out of a different context, and that, in our view, did not respect the spirit of the enabling legislation. So I'm a policy nerd, so words are important. And some might know that federal statutes, not all of them, but some, are preceded by preambular text. And that preambular text offers insight into what those who drafted the legislation intended the legislation to be. And unfortunately, it's often ignored because preambular text does not carry any legal weight, or not very much legal weight. What really matters are the specific provisions. But I'll argue that in the context of today, the preambular text of the PCPA is particularly significant in a key area, and that is economic viability and competitiveness. So you'll see here, I'll put up just a snippet of the preambular text. You can go to the PCPA and read the preambular text and draw your own conclusions. But it's quite notable that it does acknowledge the need to minimize the negative impact on economic viability and competitiveness, which is why I think it's very important today, because economic viability and competitiveness are indispensable drivers for innovation. And a regulatory system that enables innovation, I think, is one that results in improved outcomes for both the sector it regulates and society as a whole. But we are concerned that we're headed in the opposite direction, and that instead of enabling innovation, more burdensome and unnecessary regulations will drive that innovation away from Canada. So, and in the context of today, recognizing that the world isn't going back to 2021, this could have dire consequences for Canadian agriculture. So that transformation-driven agenda, while it was always presenting a kind of risk to the regulatory framework, was born of yesterday's world, and economic viability and competitiveness have rarely been more crucial. And the only way that a regulator can understand the impact of its work is to meaningfully engage with those who are most impacted. And we can say with confidence that based on the major policy decisions stemming from transformation, that hasn't happened. Industry has we've put our best foot forward in making thoughtful recommendations based on scientific and economic realities on the ground, including with other partners in the ag space. And really, for the first time, that engagement and effort is not resulting in any perceptible change. The PMRA continues to move forward with transformation initiatives despite their impacts and change of context. So we can ask a very simple question, are we better off today than we were 4 years ago? And from an industry perspective, the answer is no, right? The system is becoming less predictable, less efficient, and we're starting to see more and more of these Canadian-specific requirements, which further complicate, I would say, supply side, concerns as the protectionism gains a stronger foothold. And then compounded to this is a cost recovery proposal that some of you may or may not have seen, that radically increases costs to businesses without any appreciable benefit. So, while our approach, while it right now marks a significant departure, I guess, from the way that we usually try to work, which is very, very collaborative. But I would say that, we're in unprecedented times, and that might require some unprecedented measures, which is why we think it's now or never to hit the pause button so that we can take stock of what's happening around us and chart a better way forward. So really, it's time to go back to basics and review transformation initiatives through the lens of PMRA's core mandate, taking into account its limited financial resources. So what we want is a strong signal that the PMRA is willing to work with stakeholders like us, like you, to ensure that regulations and the regulatory framework are efficient in the areas that they need to be to allow Canadian agriculture to thrive. And really, for that to happen, we need all stakeholders to consider the impacts and advocate for a change in direction. So shameless plug, I've put up a QR code here that takes you to our Advancing Agriculture campaign, where it explains in greater detail our position and our concerns. So we hope that you can take some time to go there, read it, and send a letter to government like hundreds have already done. And of course, if you need more, any one of us here at CropLife, we're happy to discuss further offline if needed. So I think that's it for me. Thank you very much for your time today. I hope that we have still a little bit of time for questions, and more importantly, that I can actually answer them if we do. So I think with that, I'll stop sharing.
Sounds good, Paul. I do have one question just to start everyone off, and you'll have noticed we've all avoided saying your last name. Can you pronounce your last name for me?
Yeah, it's so for anglophones have a harder time because you kind of need to roll the R a little bit. So for anglophones, it's 5 syllables, and it goes Enwerekowe. So Enwerekowe is how you can if it helps remembering it that way.
Enwerekowe. I don't know.
Perfect. That's it.
Okay. So I'm stalling so that you guys can come up with some good questions here. Thank you, Paul. It's been great learning a little bit more about I've heard lots about, hit pause on the PMRA transformations, but thank you for going back and doing some of the history on that and how we got to where we are now. So do we have some questions? I see some cameras that are coming on, and do we have any questions or something just to clarify now that we have Paul here as the expert? Is there anything out there that yes, I see Cami.
Like that. Yeah, that's why everyone calls me Tall Paul. I actually
Tall
have a shirt that says Tall
I
Paul on
know.
it.
So, and to be honest, I didn't know how to pronounce your name at all till now, and I'd probably butcher it going forward. But anytime, Paul, you and I have run into each other, if people have been around, and when I first met you, Tall Paul. That's anyway. Thank you so much. I got to tell you. So I'm following this obviously for, reasons, business reasons, of course, that's significant, but I'm always a little bit fascinated with how government works anyway. But what I really, truly appreciate how you presented today was that background and that history. So I will say you had me at snake oil. So because it's absolutely fascinating to me, and I don't really have a question here. Well, I do have one at the end, but it feels to me like this is a human behavioral problem that we have been dealing with for decades, well, centuries, I guess to say. And so it's interesting when we have government intervene, as government is supposed to, when there is a gap in the market or there's something wrong. That's what government's supposed to do. But what we also are struggling with is when there is government overreach, especially in this industry. And it's almost like in their attempts to deal with what they see as the snake oil problems, they're generating their own level of snake oil in the process. So that was my one statement. But the other thing is, what can we project going forward? First, with an election, we've got an election coming up, with potentially a change in government around this. And also, do you see any of what's been going on in terms of tariffs and trades and, Trump throwing spaghetti at the wall? Do you see that having any impact or influencing or shaping this process at all?
Okay, so I guess there's a couple of elements. Thanks for that question. Couple of elements to that. First, so that's that crystal, that crystal balling and what we see might happen down the road. So we know that we're now at kind of a critical juncture where we've been working under transformation for the last 4 years. Transformation had an initial pot of money that came along with it for 2 years. And then they got, and then in budget 2024, they got additional funds. So, 4 years of money. There's no more money. There's no more money at the end of this. So as of, governments can risk manage funds a little bit to kind of like drag it into the next fiscal year a little bit, which starts April 1st. But ultimately, the funding is sunsetting. So there's a need to show results. You've now spent close to probably about $80 million on this transformation initiative, and the need to show results is there. So on one hand, what we're seeing is we're seeing this as a push. We're seeing a push now to get as much things done before the money, not only before the money runs out, but as you say, now we may be coming into an election before PMRA was maybe planning on it happening. So that brings in a few risks. And from where we sit, it is the risk of acceleration. So oftentimes when you're working on policies, when you're working on regulations, speed is not your friend, because you will have some gaps in your thinking. And that is where we feel that we're headed. And this is why we've launched the Advancing Ag campaign, is that we don't feel that there has been enough consideration of the agriculture sector's concerns in these policies and regulations that are being put forward to meet a mandate from 2021. So we are, in some ways, to be honest, we're almost hopeful a little bit for an election, not because it represents a change in government so much, but because statutory initiatives, regulations can continue, but statutory initiatives are dead in the water and need to be reset, and mandates also need to be reset. So we're looking at this as an opportunity to reset. If we don't reset, the risk is that we're going to be living with this for the next several years, because will a new government, whether it's whatever stripe it is, will it have the political capital, will it have the political willpower to deal with this particular issue? And we're not convinced that they would, which is why we want to act now. I don't know if that helps answer the question a little bit.
All right. Okay, thank you. I also wanted to mention we do have two of our board members on the call today. We have Eric Gregory with Brett Young Seeds and Stan Lowen with Terralink. So thanks to both of you for joining. Not that I'm putting, oh, and Stan has his hand up for a question. So Stan, I will turn it over to you. And you just need to unmute.
Hey, is that working?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, thanks, Myrna. So Paul, you're hitting all my buttons today, and where do you start? I'm so thankful that CropLife is doing something. I think many Canadians are weary of hearing political statements coming out of Ottawa that say things like, all we're trying to do is protect Canadians. I heard I was being protected hundreds of times during COVID as justification for spending $500 billion on something. It was pretty big. And you hear this attitude coming out of Ottawa, we're just protecting Canadians. And I think it comes through in PMRA, same kind of a concept where that's they're overreaching. At what point does Canada say enough trying to create made in Canada solutions for everything? Why keep reinventing the wheel? We have really fantastic regulatory agencies in countries like Japan, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, the EU, in the United States, and not taking politics into account. We don't need to do our own made in Canada solutions for so much of what is going on. Is the PMRA sort of rating the needs of new chemistry, new actives? If it's a low risk kind of a solution, why even have a made in Canada solution at all? Just adopt other jurisdictions that are great and use their data and just move quicker. You mentioned and versus maybe an active that has a high level of risk. Well, maybe that should have a Canadian made in Canada's solution or approach. So there's ratings here that can help us be more efficient, in whether we do this depth or not. So I guess where am I going with this? When you get opportunities to sit down with the regulators, are you able to bring a strong message that you guys need to not think about raising the cost of registering a pesticide like they are? And instead, let's think of ways that you could go from 100% of where your budget is today to 75% of where your budget is, and not deplete or decrease the service to the country.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Dan. And that's exactly what we're trying to achieve. When we're talking about things like efficiency, we're not saying that PMRA or that the regulators should do less. What we're saying is that there may be better ways, there may be more efficient ways of doing the same thing. And going back to the example of the regulatory framework is really entrenched and in the way of thinking of the regulator. And it's not just PMRA. Trying to break that mold, right, where you go from a system that has been used to doing kind of more let's call it like a review that is based off of Canadian expertise. And from a if I'm putting my regulator's hat back on, okay, one of the considerations is that level of trust, of another scientific body. And scientists are generally not wired to simply accept what someone else has done. At the end of the day, they still need to be comfortable in what they're looking at. So with that context in mind, the challenge then becomes, if stakeholders are saying, look, well, PMRA, yeah, Japan has done reviews, US have done reviews, other Australia, why do you have to redo that same science? Well, a scientist will tell you that there's always a few differences. There's always a few differences, and those few differences, they need to be reasonably certain that that won't cause an issue. Therefore, they must review the underlying data no matter what anybody says. And it's really kind of that challenge, right? That we're trying to make a progression in that direction. And it just, it takes time. It takes time. It's, we're talking about people, we're talking about ways of doing things. And there needs to be an openness, at least an openness to consider a different approach. And I just realized that I didn't answer Cammie's question on the tariffs. And yes, we are following the tariffs very, very closely. And right now, pesticides are I guess I call them exempt. They are not on that second list of products that are subject to Canadian counter tariffs, and we want to keep it that way.
Okay, awesome, Paul. Thanks for taking Stan's question, going back to Cammie's, and now we'll go over to Brian. Brian, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for letting me sit in, and I appreciate it. And Paul, thanks for all your information. I guess I'm interested, sort of just, and I'm looking at the title of the session, Uniting Agriculture. I can remember a time while I was with the Food Inspection Agency, and they made a significant change, albeit I think they made it in a very subtle way, and they said that CFIA would now be reporting to the Minister of Health instead of the Minister of Agriculture. I guess my question to you, and I'd be interested in your opinion, if we're uniting agriculture around a pest management agency challenge, if I'll call it that, and as agriculture and as all the various, as you say, very diverse pieces of agriculture, if we're trying to create a united, what are the challenges in dealing with a minister who is more interested in sick Canadians than a minister who is interested in sustainable agriculture? Is there a continuing sort of dialogue in Ottawa around the notion that these agriculture-based regulatory regimes don't belong in the Ministry of Health or reporting? And I can remember the conversation I had with my DG at the time, and he said, no, everything will be fine, everything. And I said, no, I was in the plant health directorate, and I said, no, the money is you're gonna hear this big sucking noise as the money gets pulled to food versus animal and versus plant. So I'm just interested in your perspective on that, and I'll mic myself up again here.
Okay, so thanks, Brian. That is a very complex question. Is the way I can put it. And I would say to that from my perspective, nothing is new. Everything is circular. And if you look back at when PMRA was created in the mid-90s, there was a significant discussion that culminated in two major policy documents. One is the Blue Book, and the other one is the Purple Book that established the new the PMRA as we know it. Before, you had several departments that were responsible for doing the evaluations. AFC was involved, Environment Canada. So the idea was, okay, that is not an efficient way to do things. The system is becoming more and more complex. Science is more and more complex. We've seen photos where registrants are bringing bucket loads, stacks and stacks of paper to various departments. That doesn't work. So we need to do something better. We need to have it we need to combine all of these into a single entity. The decision was to create the PMRA. And then the question was, where do we put it? Should it be with ag? Should it be with environment? Should it be with health? And the decision at the time was, well, Agriculture Canada is there to promote Canadian agriculture. The PCPA is there to protect human health and the environment. So we think that there could be a conflict of interest there. Therefore, PMRA should go under Health Canada. And that was in a nutshell, right? That was part of the rationale at the time. Now we've kind of gone full circle, where we are asking those same questions again, because we are having issues with efficiency. And the efficiency issues might be different than they were in the 80s, and early 90s, but they're there nonetheless. And we are starting to ask those questions again as to, is this the best way? So I think there's lots of different ways that this could go. You have some who believe that PMRA is best served somewhere else, but then that also entails some other considerations that would need to be explored. So, I mean, I hate to say it, but there's no quick fix, which is why our focus, at least on the regulatory side, right? At least on the regulatory side, is to identify those pain points and find a way to, at least in the shorter term, start working through those, recognizing that we're going to have a big policy discussion at some point. It seems that it's inevitable.
No, and I 100%, and I guess that conflict of interest you talk about is principle why there became an agency called the Food Inspection Agency. So anyway, thank you very much.
All right. Are there any other questions? Oh, I see Stan. Okay.
Yeah, there's lots, Paul, you touched on competitiveness, and I think working in an industry out here in BC where the fruit and veggie market is the biggest market for crop input products in BC. We don't have broad acre agriculture, and we compare ourselves constantly to the USA and their fruit and veggie people. There's a lot of cross-border talk. There's all kinds of science shared, and there's conferences, whatnot, by farmers and agri-retailers, everybody. And we have a growing concern about future competitiveness in the specialty crop industry. And I don't think that's any different than the broadacre crop industry. I think there's a general concern about Canadian competitiveness. And so Agriculture Canada is there to promote agriculture and to do research and to bring new innovation in science to the application stage of applied science in agriculture. So we are big fans of that, and we would look to, in the specialty crop industry, Agriculture Canada and the PMRA, however they're organized, to lead, not just keep their arms around things so there's sort of like control. They got to lead in making Canadian agriculture competitive. And if we're sort of creating new mission statements for these agencies, whoever they are, or the departments of the government, you touched on the competitive nature. That is the crucial thing. If we're going to remain viable on the international stage and be able to weather storms like the one we're going through right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know how much time I have, Myrna.
Well, we're at 1 o'clock, but go ahead. People, if you need to, anyone on the call today, if you need to move on. Lisa, do you need to move on anywhere, or are you okay to stay on? Okay, let's continue.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, if there are people do need to leave, the recording will be sent out. So if they do miss something, they'll catch that in the recording. Sorry, go
And
ahead.
if you do have questions you didn't get to share, put them in the chat, and then we can, Paul has agreed to respond to those after, and we can send that out as well. But go ahead, Paul.
Okay. So yes, fruit and veg. Fruit and veg is again, I'm talking about it from a policy perspective. It does present certain challenges, and that is because of the way that the regulatory framework is designed, right? So when we're talking about things like improving efficiency, considering competitiveness, these are some of the discussions that I think would be very valuable to have, because the fruit and veg industry is, minor uses. In the U.S., I mean, the reality is that Canada, when it comes to crop protection, like we don't really grow anything in a field for much of the year. Ground is frozen. There's ways around it. Maybe you've got greenhouses and things like that, but it is not the same kind of volume as in the U.S. So for crop protection, it's a relatively small market. So when you talk about economic viability and competitiveness together, right? So economic viability is, can you sell something to make a profit? And it's no secret, right, that some minor uses, that viability for a crop protection product may not be what it needs to be. So throughout the years, the government has tried to work within the existing framework to provide some benefit, like some extra data protection, for example, and setting up the minor use, the minor use system with PMC. But ultimately, it does not address, right, the more structural issues, where the goal really is to have timely access to innovations, sort of at the same time as everyone else. I think in a best case scenario, you would have every use for a new compound. You would have every use available under the sun. But that's not always the case. So you have a situation where you'll have minor uses that get added over time, and the way that regulatory science works is that, just at a very basic level, is that you have this risk cup, and the evaluators, when they're looking at that, there's a certain risk cup when an initial submission is made, and then over the life cycle you might add things, and oftentimes you're adding those minor uses later, and you might get into a situation where, either come reevaluation or special review or something, you need to remove those. So it's a real struggle for the horse sector to have timely access to the newer innovations. They're usually, behind the eight ball on that one, through no fault of their own. But it's a very interesting question. I think everyone knows that there's an issue there, and it's about trying to find the solution to that.
All right. Well, thank you, Paul. Stan got a thumbs up there, so good. Francois, I don't want to put you on the spot. I did see you typing. I don't know if you do have a question, if we have time. If you don't, that's fine, but.
No, I was just writing very interesting. That's all. Here,
Okay.
I'll send it. Thank you.
Okay.
There we go.
Oh, there it
Paul.
came finally. Okay, sorry. I just saw you typing. I didn't want to miss out. So, well, thank you to everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Paul and Enwerekowe. I don't know if I got that right, but anyway.
Yeah, pretty good.
We tried.
Good job.
So it's been great. I appreciate you joining us. I appreciate everyone being able to be involved in our Connect sessions here. And I'm just to remind you that the next one is April 3rd. Greg Bartley is actually on the call today, and he's going to be talking about those mitigating risks and the maximum residue limits. So looking forward to that one. Thanks again, everyone. Have a really great week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Oh, and by the way, a recording will be sent out to you. Anyone who registered will receive a recording and will come from Lisa. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.